Hello and welcome to another PA Political Digest podcast. Earlier, we did a look ahead in 2026's elections for governor and the state legislature. Today, we're going to focus on Pennsylvania's hottest four congressional races. It is no understatement to say that the road to the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives runs through Pennsylvania next year. And today we're going to look at four of the hottest races in the country: PA 1, PA 7, PA 8, and PA 10. To help me through these races, I am joined now by Kyle Condict, the managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball, a nonpartisan election forecasting newsletter published by the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Hi, Kyle. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So you guys, you triage races, you frame races, you put them into categories for those of us out in the world that have to digest a lot of these races. You help them put into certain categories, and we're going to get to them halfway through today's podcast. But let's dive right into Pennsylvania 7. Before we do that, I want to lay the groundwork for people. Every 12 years in Pennsylvania, Kyle, we have what I call the short ballot, and we'll have that next year. So next year in Pennsylvania, the entire state will vote for governor, Congress, and state house, and half the state will also vote for state senate. So three or four races every 12 years, the short ballot. We have no U.S. Senate race next year, no races for our state row offices or anything like that. So here are some relevant stats for Pennsylvania 7, held by Republican freshman Ryan Mackenzie, a former state representative. He beat Susan Wild, a three-term Democrat incumbent, in 2024 with 50.5% of the vote. The voter registration there from 2024 till today has moved 4 points overall in the Republican favor. Of course, I will say, as I always do, that registration and performance are two different things. Trump took 51.5% of the vote here. And in 2022, our Governor Josh Shapiro took 55.3% of the vote there. This district is all of the Lehigh Valley, Lehigh and Northampton counties, all of Carbon County, and a little slice of Monroe. So, Kyle, your views on Pennsylvania 7 and Ryan Mackenzie.
I think it's one of the great swing seats in the country, really. I mean, you look across the map, and particularly after some mid-decade redistricting we've seen in, California, Texas, a few other places, that hasn't really overall changed the House math all that much. But the share of districts that voted, Donald Trump won about 50%, a little less than 50% of the national popular vote. You look at the districts where he got between like 51 and 49% of the vote. There are only 22 of those left, and PA
Here we
7
are.
is one
Yeah.
of them. Yeah. So it's a great, it's a great swing district, the way that it's constructed now. And you've got a first term Republican incumbent who's running there, a it looks like a competitive, crowded Democratic primary, although you've seen both Governor Shapiro and also figures like Bernie Sanders get behind Bob Brooks, who's a firefighters union leader. There are a few other credible candidates running. So that's we're going to talk about these races. That's the one where you've got the really hot, a really hot primary.
I,
Um,
you know,
uh,
that's what has struck me too, is that the outgoing Northampton County executive is in the race. Susan Wild, the former member, she endorsed a woman named Carol Obando Durstein, a former aide to Bob Casey, Senator Bob Casey. There's a young fellow who used to be a Republican and used to be a DOJ prosecutor. He's in the race, and so far he has led the money hunt. So what I find interesting here, and also his name is Ryan Crosswell, and there's also the Lehigh County Controller Mark Pinsley in the race. Brooks, the firefighter guy, got in kind of late, so it's interesting that the Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, the governor, seemed to be coalescing around Brooks. He kind of, I think, is in the same mold as that Plattner fellow up in Maine, uh, a
Hope he doesn't have
Democratic.
as many tattoos.
Well, he has a bunch, and they are shown in some of his
Or
pictures, but it
or
may not
rather,
be.
maybe if he has tattoos, but not necessarily inflammatory ones.
Well, yeah, yeah. Let's hope people don't have inflammatory tattoos, whatever that means. So, to me, looking from the Republican side, if I'm Ryan Mackenzie, I'm hoping that there's a lot of money raised in this primary. There's not going to be huge policy differences between these people, so perhaps it'll get personal and it'll kind of blow up in their faces. Because at this point, you might have three well-funded Democrats in that race on the primary.
Yeah, I mean, one good thing for Democrats in this primary is that the primary is not that late. You know, there have been instances like some states, like Arizona, for instance, is a good example, where that state their primary is usually in August. They've actually moved it up slightly in recent years, but it's still kind of a mid to late summer primary. What Pennsylvania is in April. Um,
3 years out of four, it's the third Tuesday in May, so that's what it'll be next year.
oh, okay,
Presidential years, it moves up to the fourth Tuesday in April. Every
yeah.
presidential year, we have a discussion about moving it to be more relevant, and it never goes anywhere. And I tell people it's hard for Pennsylvania to be any more relevant in a presidential race in the general election, but they want action in the primary too.
Yeah, and so there's going to be plenty of time still for whoever wins the primary to sort of, consolidate the party behind them and also, turn the fundraising spigot on. And so, Mackenzie had a better individual quarter than any of the other, any of the Democratic candidates, but the combined fundraising for the Democrats was also, more than Mackenzie. And what we've sometimes seen in House races in recent vintage is that the Democrats really start to pour it on in terms of fundraising and after the primary season, and there's a consolidation. And the fact that, if in fact, if Brooks ends up winning the primary and he ends up being a candidate, whether he is or not, remains to be seen. Um, but he does seem like someone who might have some, be able to tap into fundraising connections, kind of both in the center left and further left. And so that, that's something that's interesting to watch too. But, again, you just look at the geography here and like I don't think this is necessarily a must win to win the majority, but this is the kind of seat you probably would expect to vote for the majority party in the House, and there aren't really that many of them across the country. It just covers pretty competitive territory.
Yeah, so the Democratic consulting firm doing that Plattner guy up in Maine is also doing Brooks. So they're involved here. I don't know if they still get along with their former client John Fetterman because he is in the middle of some sort of, metamorphosis before our eyes. And the last thing I would say about this race is it's tougher for challengers because while the Lehigh Valley is its own distinct place with radio and newspaper, it's still inside the Philadelphia media market, which is incredibly pricey. And we'll get back to that later when we go to the first district. Let's move on to the eighth district now. If the seventh district is the Lehigh Valley seat, we call the eighth district the NEPA seat, Northeast PA, NEPA, we call it NEPA. The president's rally at the Mount Airy Casino Resort was in Monroe County in the 8th District part. And that is also a freshman Republican, Rob Bresnahan. He beat six-term Democrat Matt Cartwright back in 2024. Voter registration there has moved an aggregate of 5.5% towards the GOP since 2024. He beat Cartwright with 50.8% of the vote. Both Trump and Shapiro got 54% here. We were talking about this particular district in preparation for this call, and you were going back and forth about how to classify it.
Yeah, we still have Bresnahan as sort of a soft favorite. It leans Republican. This is classic kind of like Obama to Trump turf. See these kinds of places across, particularly the sort of what I always like to lump Pennsylvania in with the Midwest, but it's not technically in the Midwest. So the term I use is the industrial North. And Scranton, Wilkes-Barre is sort of a classic kind of industrial North hub. Place that where Democrats used to be a lot stronger than they are today. If you go back to the 2012 presidential results in these four competitive congressional districts we're talking about, Obama performed definitely the best in Pennsylvania 80, won it by about 12 and a half points in 2012. And yet, by the time you get to 2024, this is Trump's best district out of the four. Trump won it by about 8.5. And Biden lost it two, although it was by a slimmer, kind of about 3 point margin. And it's interesting too that in the when Cartwright won the seat, he defeated, and I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he defeated kind of a Holden, Tim Holden, is that the guy's name? The other another Democrat in this seat back in, I think it was the 2012 primary. Um, and Cartwright was this was sort of designed when it was a Republican gerrymander as like a Democratic vote sink. And then it voted for Trump anyway because those kinds of places, be it Youngstown in Ohio or Scranton, they've just become much less Democratic in Trump years. So really fascinating place, and curious to see if Democrats can kind of turn the clock back. John Fetterman did actually carry the district in 2022 in his Senate race, although only by about a point. So, but if you have a good environment for Democrats in 2026, I think this is a legitimate target for them. Although I think probably at least seven and quite possibly 10, which we'll talk about, are better targets for Democrats.
So this district is entirely within the Scranton media market, so that is obviously less expensive than, say, Philadelphia. The Democrats had settled several months ago on the popular Scranton mayor, a woman named Paige Cognetti, who is not from NEPA. She moved there from the Pacific Northwest 12 or 15 years ago. She has some uh, Obama background in her political work. But just in the last week, State Senator Marty Flynn, the Democrat who represents Scranton, has been all over the media saying, "Wait, hold on, maybe I might run." And I don't know if that's serious or if he just doesn't like being overlooked. But Marty Flynn, the state senator, his seat is up next year. In Pennsylvania, you can run for both a state and a federal seat at the same time. So we'll see. We'll see if what is happening in the seventh starts to happen in the eighth. Bresnahan has had some issues with his stock trading, and that has brought Democrats to the fore. That same Democratic consulting firm that's doing Brooks and the fellow in Maine is also doing Page Cognetti. So we're starting to see kind of a trend here. She has been close with Casey and with Shapiro as well. So, but we'll see what happens with Senator Flynn. His Democratic bona fides go way back. He was a House member before he was a senator, that sort of thing.
I was just checking my memory about Tim Holden losing to Matt Cartwright, and that was in fact the case in 2012. And again, it's just interesting that when the district was designed, and again, this was under the Republican gerrymander. Of course, we've got a court drawn map now, but it covers a lot of the same territory, and it's like Democratic vote sink turns into Republican bastion basically. But that's been the story of just this dramatic change again all over the Midwest and the Northeast in the Trump years.
I tell people if you're bored with Pennsylvania politics, wait 6 months because it's going to change. And we've seen, as I refer to it, greater and non-urban southwestern Pennsylvania turn on its heels and become very Republican. The Philadelphia suburbs becoming, more Democratic, and then NEPA again kind of going through its own metamorphosis. So we'll see how that goes. So before we go to the other two districts, explain to our viewers how you guys categorize races from safe R to safety and everything in the middle.
Yeah, so we have toss-ups. Those are obviously the ones that were most competitive and where we don't see a favorite. Lean Dem or lean Republican, which is again where we have PA8 as leans Republican. We have PA7 as a toss-up. We also have PA10 as a toss-up. We have PA1 as leans Republican. And so those are ones that are pretty competitive, but also one where we do see a small favorite. likely Democratic, likely Republican. Those are ones kind of on the periphery of the playing field. And then, safe Democratic and safe Republican, where we see basically there being zero chance of there being a party change. The vast majority of districts are safe Dem or safe Republican. Um, as of our ratings right now, we only have 16 toss-ups in the whole country, so two of them are in Pennsylvania. It is also striking that of the districts that are toss-ups, a lot of them are in states where one side doesn't dominate redistricting. And so in Pennsylvania, you had the maps drawn after divided government. Of course, the Democratic-controlled Pennsylvania Supreme Court intervened against a Republican gerrymander in advance of 2018. The court was then, ended up doing it again after the 2020 census. It was happening under divided government. Redistricting was happening under divided government. Hypothetically, and I'm actually curious what you think about this, but if in fact Democrats were to, or actually Republicans, because Republicans could win a trifecta, even though I think Governor Shapiro at least is favored in 2026. But if you were to have go from divided government to a trifecta, could that party then decide to redistrict for 2028, given the spate of mid-decade redistricting we've seen across the country? So that's something that might be on the table if you do see one side sweep.
So, the Democrats control the state house by one stubborn vote. Republicans are 27-23 in the state Senate. I'm not sure if Shapiro would want to do that if he wins re-election, because he's also running for president at the same time. And that would kind of go against the grain. Because if you do regular redistricting, it's the governor will elect in 2030 that would be in charge of that. In Pennsylvania, our congressional redistricting is a bill that has to pass the state house and state senate and be signed by the governor like any other bill. For state redistricting, we have a five-person commission, one person from each legislative caucus, and then that fifth person appointed by the Supreme Court. So we have two totally separate processes for doing redistricting. I would bet against some sort of mid-decade redistricting here overall. I just don't see an appetite for it. And again, even if one party takes all three, the state's still on a razor's edge. And one of the things you're seeing in other states is they're bringing down the Republican margin and dispersing it. And if we have a tough year next year, you could see some of the, you've written about this, you guys, you could see some of those seats fall. Instead of being Trump 22, they're Trump 10. And in a wave year, you can lose a plus 10 seat.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, 2026 is going to be a different election than 2028 will be. 2028 is going to be determined a lot by who the presidential candidates are. And, you're going to have at least a competitive primary on the Democratic side, maybe on the Republican side too. But just something in the back of my mind, Gavin Newsom, the outgoing governor of California, he decided to go big on gerrymandering in
He
response to
did.
Texas, and I
He
think
did.
politically it worked out for him, and it was something that I think has given him some cachet in the party. Now that's not enough to deliver him to the nomination, and I would argue that Governor Shapiro and Governor Newsom are fundamentally kind of different politically. Shapiro doesn't seem like the kind of thing that he would run a hitch his wagon to your point, if he had the opportunity to. But who knows? I mean, the point is that the Pennsylvania map is a court drawn map because the legislature couldn't do it. You hypothetically could maybe see a change if you had a government. Just something I'm keeping in the back of my
Well,
mind.
me too. So we've done 7 and 8. Now we're going to move on to Pennsylvania 10, where I happen to be sitting today in suburban Harrisburg. That is a district that's been held for quite some time by Republican Scott Perry. He beat former TV broadcaster Janelle Stelson in 2024 with 50.6% of the vote. Trump took 52% here. Shapiro took 55%. In our most recently completed municipal elections in November, the Democrats had some big victories in some suburban Harrisburg municipalities, Derry Township, where Hershey is, and Hampton Township, both went big for Democrats. on the municipal level. So, as we say in politics, the trend is your friend. And right now, the trend here in Pennsylvania 10, which is all of Dauphin County, most of Cumberland, and half of York, it's the Harrisburg, Carlisle, York city seat. The trend favors the Democrats.
This district, we talked about how PA8 has gone from being, a Democratic district to a Republican leaning one at the presidential level. PA10 is arguably changing in a similar kind of way, although less dramatic. You go back to 2012, Mitt Romney won it by about 7.5 points. That's when Mitt Romney's losing by 4 points nationally to Barack Obama. And then it was Trump by 5.2 or a little over 5 points in 2024. So a little bit of an erosion. Democrats have been losing ground in a lot of parts of Pennsylvania geographically, but you can look at like Harrisburg and Carlisle, as places where you have seen a little bit of growth for Democrats. And you also have in Scott Perry, like clearly the most ideologically and clearly the most kind of right wing of the four Republican House incumbents we're talking about. I thought it was striking that recently we just saw this discharge petition get through the U.S. House, in which the Democrats plus a handful of Republicans are going to force a vote on extending these subsidies for the Affordable Care Act for the next 3 years. And three of the four, signers, the Republicans that helped put it over the edge were, Ryan Mackenzie, Rob Bresnahan, and Brian Fitzpatrick, who haven't talked about yet. And so that was I think, probably a fairly politically astute move to try to, position themselves in swing districts on being probably on the side of public opinion on this healthcare issue. But Scott Perry's not that kind of member, and so that's why he ran several points behind Donald Trump in his own district. And this is a district that, again, if you had a different Republican incumbent, maybe it would be like a leans Republican kind of seat. And I was just thinking about this. If you put Brian Fitzpatrick in this district and you put Scott Perry in Brian Fitzpatrick's district, Perry would be probably, he may have already lost by now, or he would
Yeah.
be, one of maybe the most vulnerable Republican in the country. And Brian Fitzpatrick would be like a perfect. I mean, he's a great fit for the district he's in now, but he'd be an even better fit for this district that is, at its core, kind of more, ancestrally Republican. Certainly you go back before the Trump years and it was a redder district. So very interesting place. There's a lot of growth in York County, although that county has still remained like very Republican leaning. And so that's one of the challenges for Democrats is that, like, you on paper, I guess you look at York and say, oh, well, maybe that's going to trend Democratic. It really hasn't. Cumberland has to some extent, although it's still a Republican county. This district did vote for Dr. Oz in the Senate race, although only by a point. So
Yep. It was
again,
neck and neck.
it's PA8 at the presidential level has moved to the right of this district. But down the ballot, this is, again, I think probably the most fundamentally Republican of the four seats. So another just very, very interesting race, I think.
The part of York County that's absorbing all these refugees from Maryland, that southern York is not in the 10th district. It's in Lloyd Smucker's 11th. Cumberland County is the first or second fastest growing county in the state, depending on how you map that. Interestingly, the voter registration in Cumberland County today is exactly the same it was 10 years ago, but the Democratic performance is way up. So I'm thinking about whether they are a Bucks and Chester County, but just 8 years kind of, behind the wagon if we're going to see that.
Well, in some ways, the registration standing still, you could actually read as like a Democratic trend, because the overall statewide registration, of course, went from what Democrats had an almost million vote registration advantage. And now that's been whittled down to what I think at last count, it's about 170,000 statewide.
Among
And that does
active
seem,
among active voters, it went from a little over a million to a little more than 27,000.
hmm.
Okay, among active voters, it is bigger among all voters, but among those who vote, it was essentially even going into November's election, which is why those results were even harder to swallow because the GOP, we had done such a good job narrowing the margin.
Yeah, and if you just look at the the presidential, the change at the presidential level in these four districts, they all got redder from 2020 to 2024, which you'd expect. But PA 10 it was only a point, whereas in the other districts, in PA 8 it was about 5.5. In in 7 it was about 4 points, and in 1 it was about 4 points. In terms of the shift toward Trump, so you could see the sort of the slow evolving kind of evolution, the change in PA 10 from being a Republican leaning district to a swing district. And again, that's why it's such a fascinating race. And Stelson is another one of these Democratic candidates who's just going to be printing money. And Scott Perry's fundraising has picked up too, as he's found himself in more of a in a more competitive seat. Although he had a pretty close race in 2018, in a district that was probably marginally different than this one, but pretty similar.
Yeah, it did not change much. Anywhere this district goes, it's going to bring in more Republican territory than what it has now. Perry has not always been the strongest fundraiser, but necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So he has realized he has to do more. Janelle Stelson, to me, she was a C-minus candidate at best 2 years ago. She never moved into the district, even though she lives just 9 miles away. She gave confusing and conflicting excuses for why that hadn't happened, but might happen. She has since moved into an apartment in Cumberland County. I noticed on the voter rolls that she is registered to vote Democrat in Cumberland County now. There's also a primary here. The At least one other candidate is Dauphin County President Commissioner Justin Douglas, who surprisingly won the county commissioner seat in 2023, giving Democrats the majority here. We have county commissioners in most counties in Pennsylvania. It's always two of one party, one of the other. So he is another guy with tattoos and stuff. I don't know who's doing his race, but he has a website and he's out there campaigning. He just voted for the second year in a row to raise county taxes. I don't know if that'll make a difference in a Democratic primary, but a lot of the Democrats I talk to, again, I live in this seat, were just underwhelmed by Stelson's performance as a candidate. So that is something you can learn, right? You can learn to be a better candidate and a better speaker and know how to work the rooms better. So we'll see. Shapiro was very much engaged in her race too. He recently did a fundraiser for that Bob Brooks fellow in the Lehigh Valley. He's also done a fundraiser for Shapiro. So I think he sees a way to cement his image and help his presidential races, not just to get himself reelected, but also to bring some other fellow Democrats along for the ride. So to me, I think, one last thing about the 10th, as political consultants think, it's all in the Harrisburg media market. So again, single media market congressional districts are less expensive to run because you don't have to feed two TV monsters. You just have to feed one.
Yeah,
Um,
and look, for whatever complaints there were about Stelson as a campaigner, I would say her actual electoral performance was pretty good. Now, maybe some of that was just she was very well resourced, and Perry has problems of his own. But getting within a little more than a point as Trump's carrying the district by 5. I mean, that's that is I think that is a pretty solid performance. But now in what almost certainly will be a better political environment than 2024 was, it's just a question of how much better. Can Stelson get over the line? And that's the key. That's a
yeah,
key question. And this is
I could never figure out, Kyle, why the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC or D-Trip as we call it, why they didn't make her move into the district, because that was just a very easy attack against her. I used to tell people she couldn't even vote for herself, and out of the primary or the general, why would you vote for her if she can't even vote for herself? And I think it is, illustrative that, she changed that for this time. So yeah, the trends here are more democratic. She's going to have all the money she needs. I'm curious on your take before we move on to the last district here. But my recollection is that in general, congressional rematches are worse for the second time candidate, not better.
I don't know of like the overall research on that, but I mean, there are lots of examples of people who have run several times who end up winning, in subsequent elections. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's some sort of handicap for Stelson in this race. I mean, again, it's something it's something you see every cycle. There are people who have failed in the past who come back and win. One thing about the residency question, and we were actually you mentioned the Paige King-Netty is not from Scranton originally.
She lives in that district. She's not from there.
Right, right, exactly. But it does make me think about sort of parochialism, and there are some there's census questions about basically whether someone's born in a state or not. And not surprisingly, if you go through the Sun Belt, it's more like 50-50 in terms of out of state or born in state.
Not here.
Whereas Pennsylvania is like 75% plus, and like Ohio's that way and Michigan's that way. And so I kind of wonder if because this comes up a lot, this comes up in races all the time too, that there's someone who's running in a district who doesn't actually live in the district, and there's no, in some state I don't know what Pennsylvania's rule is specifically, but in a lot of state legislative races or lower level races, you do have to live in the district based on the law in a given state.
That's how it
But
is here too.
yeah, but
I
for
I I used to call it an unforced error for Stelson because on paper, she had the name ID of being a broadcaster, which saved her $2 million in TV time, so she
Mhm.
didn't have to introduce herself. And then you have this unforced error. She's not married. She's divorced. She doesn't have kids. So I never understood why she just couldn't rent an apartment somewhere in the district. So in Pennsylvania, in our primaries, your county is listed
Right.
beneath your name. So on her primary ballot, it said Lancaster. Lancaster and this district are all part of the greater central Pennsylvania, but this 10th district is a capital region district, and Lancaster is just it's a distinct entity.
Yeah.
So that's why I just couldn't
Well,
understand why.
the fact that she's got the Cumberland address now, I think helps. It's sort of a belated response to that. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I
to,
mean,
to
you got
that to,
so
to that
close.
criticism.
So
And yeah, that's a great point too. That's a point I make to national folks about PA primaries is that the county label is actually on the ballot, and so you don't see as much kind of like parochial local voting in primaries as maybe you used to because just like everything is nationalized. But I think you do see it in Pennsylvania to some degree. And like I think about like Fetterman's when Fetterman ran for lieutenant governor, or wait, no, maybe I'm blanking on this. I think maybe the 2016 Senate primary that Fetterman was in. Yeah,
yeah,
Fetterman didn't win, but you did see kind of like a regional distinction, and I think the fact that the fact that the hometown or the home county is on the ballot probably does contribute to that. I mean, because you are giving some extra information to the voter. It's like in certain races, like there are like the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, for instance, they have these big elections every, many springs they do. And there isn't actually the party label on the ballot. So even though everyone kind of, the party
you
label is
know,
kind of effectively known, but you are kind of denying that level of information to the voters. And actually in the retention elections in PA in the Supreme Court, party label, even though they're elected in partisan races initially, party label is not on the ballot for the retention. Now that didn't prevent those justices from winning relatively easily, although those became a heated race in a way that maybe hadn't been in the
very,
past.
very hidden. And just so people don't dig me, because we have an educated viewership here. In Pennsylvania, if you're running for a district that's all within one county, your municipality is listed under your name. If you run in a district that crosses county lines, then it's your county name underneath. So if the primary is Justin Douglas, the commissioner, it'll say Dauphin County under his name and
Mhm.
Janelle Stelson, Cumberland. So the last district we're going to look at is the Bucks County Centered First District, where I grew up, held by Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, literally by his votes, one of the most, if not the most moderate, middle of the road member of the House. He took more than 56% of the vote in 2024. Kamala Harris won the district. Donald Trump won Bucks County, which is 85% of the district, but Kamala Harris won with 49.7% of the vote that district. The voter registration here in the last couple of years has tilted back towards the Republican Party. So now it's 42.5% Republican, 40% Democratic, and 17.5% independent. It's a 3-point move towards the GOP. And his primary opponent, this is one of the places where there's really no talk of a primary, is Democratic County Commissioner Bob Harvey. So that race looks to be already set up. Fitzpatrick often gets a primary from the MAGA right, considering he was the only Republican in the House to vote against the one big beautiful bill, and what he did recently with healthcare, about extending the special Obamacare subsidies. I'm curious to see if he gets another primary challenge from the right.
Yeah, and historically that primary challenger has gotten some slice of the vote. I mean, what again in the 30s probably. I think maybe there was
Mid
a 60
30s.
forty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and but what makes Fitzpatrick vulnerable to that in a primary is part of the reason why he's been such a good general election performer. He's one of only three Republicans in a Kamala Harris won district. Mike Lawler in New York is one of the others, and then Don
Long
Bacon, who's
Island.
retiring
Yeah.
from Nebraska too. Lawler is in
Long
just
Island, right?
no, it's like Hudson Valley. I think he
Oh,
might
the
even have
Hudson
like a
Valley.
little bit
Okay.
of Westchester, but yeah, just
Okay.
north of the city. But so and in fact, when Fitzpatrick won re-election in 2018, which was I think the closest general election of his career when he beat Scott Wallace, um, that he was one of only three Clinton district Republicans to survive that year. So he's in kind of rarefied air in terms of he survived 2018. He was one of only a few one of only three Harris district Republicans this time, and I think that the what Democrats will want is just like this thing gets totally nationalized. It's a huge wave, and Fitzpatrick just gets washed away because that's just what happens. But at the moment, I think Fitzpatrick is a favorite. We have his leans Republican, and I think this is it's interesting in that this is the only Harris won district of the four that we're talking about, and yet Fitzpatrick of the Republicans seems like the best bet to win re-election.
Well,
Because I think the
he
Bresnahan seat is closer to being a toss up than the Fitzpatrick seat is.
I would agree with that. He's a very good campaigner, very good politician. His late brother, the dear departed Mike Fitzpatrick, who was a longtime friend of mine, we were from the same part of Levittown in the lower end of the county together. He was a good politician as well. Brian is a former FBI agent who's worked overseas and did counterterrorism in Ukraine. He's been very vocal about America continuing to fully support Ukraine in their war with Russia. So I think he is very well positioned. If I had to pick one person who wouldn't be carried out with the wash in a national wave, it would be him. But at some point, every dam breaks. The other thing I would note is Fitzpatrick is a fundraising machine, and he has, I think, 5 million more dollars in the bank than Bob Harvey. Now that will change as Harvey has more cycles behind him. But this district is totally in the Philadelphia media market. So it's 60, $70,000 a day to be on Philadelphia TV, not counting anything else you do. So this is one place where your total cash on hand really matters.
Yeah, and if Democrats, it's like because Fitzpatrick has a money edge, I mean, Harvey may very well catch up. Or not catch up. I mean, not in terms of the total raise, but start to post better quarters. But if Democrats are really going to come in big in terms of outside spending, that's like, they're going to have a lot of money to spend, but it becomes kind of difficult when you've got other districts to prioritize. And I mean, they have another district in that media market to
The
prioritize
seventh,
in
right?
in the seventh, which is a, top tier grade A, Democratic target. Again, even though on paper, the PA1 is actually is actually a more attractive target based on the presidential performance, but that's not it's just a different story because Fitzpatrick is a strong incumbent. Now again, what you have seen over the years is that the sort of personal power of incumbency it just doesn't seem to do what it used to. And that again, if there's like a big wave, and again, it was, it was a relatively close race in 2018, even though Wallace had a lot of problems, although Wallace also had a lot of money to spend on his own, that I don't think Harvey would have. So, um,
Wallace was a self-funder who had lived abroad, like in South
right,
Africa, for much of the previous 25 years. So he had all the money he needed, but he had absolutely no legs in the district because he just hadn't
right.
been there.
Where at least Harvey, he's been elected to, to local office, and so has better ties. I remember Wallace was also getting dinged for, I think he ran some sort of charitable foundation or something, and it was giving to, to basically to causes that Republicans could attack. But I would
Exactly.
say I would say this is more of a sleeper compared to the other to the other three. And again, if there's a surprise on election night, I think Fitzpatrick, if he were to lose, that would be part of, that would be a surprise. Whereas, again, even though we have his leans Republican, if Bresnahan lost, I don't think it would be that big of a surprise, and the other two really could go either way.
Well, it's often said that a member of Congress's toughest reelect is their first one because they're still kind of adjusting. Bresnahan owned and ran his family construction company. Ryan Mackenzie was in the state house for 6 or 7 terms, so he already knew how to be a legislator. That's something Rob Bresnahan is learning to do. Um, that I think always gave Scott Perry an edge. He was in the state house first, so he knew what it was like to be a legislator. So I think the last thing I'll say about Pennsylvania one is after the Democrats had a great election day in November there, won everything, 4 judges, the DA, the sheriff. So the local Republicans really, what they have left are their state house members, a state senator, and Brian Fitzpatrick. So I know those folks, they work hard at what they do. I think they're certainly going to circle the wagons. Bob Harvey is on the periphery of an FBI investigation concerning Falls Township, a large township in Lower Bucks where he was a supervisor. So far, it's been mostly smoke, but no fire. But again, it's not
Well,
nothing.
if there is fire, the NRCC will find it, or Fitzpatrick and his allies will find it, because
Absolutely.
you're running for Congress. It's just a different, certainly a much different level of opposition research. But yeah, there
Absolutely.
has been
And
some there has been some I mean, you know the story much better than I do, but I've seen some reporting about it, although reporting from local sources. I don't think it's really broken into sort of the national conversation all that much. But again, it very well could, depending on how hot this race gets and how much,
yeah, I mean, there's more than enough there to make 2 TV ads about. All right. You've
Yeah.
got lots of local coverage in newspapers. You have the headlines. Harvey really hasn't had a good explanation for it besides all this corruption was happening around me, but it didn't impact me. We'll see how that goes. Um, I think we're a couple months away. Like every March, I kind of put it on my calendar that the DCCC will make a big announcement about reserving $4 or $5 million worth of TV time in Philadelphia in October. And then as the campaigns go, that kind of gets whittled away and they end up not really spending any of it against Fitzpatrick. But as you pointed out, it's the same media market for the Lehigh Valley seat in the seventh. So before we wrap up, why don't you tell folks, Kyle, where they can find more about Sabato's crystal ball and the Center for Politics?
Yeah, centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball. We have our race ratings. So you'll see all these, the PA races and where we have them, as we talked about in our conversation today. You can also sign up for our newsletter. We usually come out twice a week. We actually just had a piece about Pennsylvania in the newsletter right before the holidays, and some of those local results, and also the Supreme Court elections. And we'll be back in the new year. Taking a fresh look at all these races, and and Pennsylvania really is going to be a place of focus, even though, as you know, it's got the quote unquote short ballot, so there's no Senate race this year, which is what I would care the most about, I think. But the Republicans won a 220 to 215 House majority in 2024. That included winning 3 seats, 7, 8, and 10 in Pennsylvania. 2 of those were Democratic flips. The margins were all under 2 points or less, and so you could almost say that, I mean, part of a big reason why the Republicans won the House is because they held 10 and they flipped 7 and 8. So those districts will again be a big part of the story for the House in 2026. I think I would think if the Democrats were to flip the majority, they would win at least one of these seats. With again 7 and 10 as the best candidates, and if Republicans hang on to all four of them, that might be part of the story of them somehow hanging on to the House majority, which again I think they're probably underdogs to do, even though we've got the redistricting stuff. But Pennsylvania's a state where we're not going to see redistricting for 2026, but where you do have a lot of pretty competitive districts, particularly in eastern Pennsylvania.
Before we say goodbye, I just want to mention two other congressional races for people to keep an eye out on. One is the 6th district, represented now by Chrissy Houlihan. Republicans have endorsed a really good candidate, Marty Young, who is went through West Point and is a military chaplain and a successful business owner. And then James Hayes out in the 12th district against Summer Lee. Summer Lee is a very outspoken member of the squad, and continues to, even though that's a pretty good Democratic district, take positions that I think aren't quite mainstream. And I know in talking beforehand, you had another district that you would put on the edge of being competitive too.
Yeah, the two you mentioned we have rated as safe Democratic. I think in like a Republican kind of waves. If Kamala Harris was president, maybe we'd be talking about those districts as ones that we'd have rated. We do have Chris Deluzio in Pennsylvania 17, as in I think it's likely Democratic right now. That's another one where Deluzio did pretty well in both 2022 when that district was created. It's sort of the kind of like the district that Connor Lamb held before he tried to run for U.S. Senate. That's one that's kind of on the watch list. But again, the four that we really focused on, all those Republican held seats, and Harrisburg and east of Harrisburg are the ones that we're really watching.
So thank you again, Kyle Kondik from Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball at the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, being with me today on the PA Political Digest podcast. I will wish everybody a happy new year, and there'll be a lot more next year on PPD. Thanks again, and thank you, Kyle. Take care.
Nice talking to you, Chris. Thanks.
See ya.